All right, we're starting our class. This is Global Local Politics. Terry Clark, second to last session. We'll have the review session for the exam on Wednesday. Today, Monday, we're going to start. we're going to have some material on policy-oriented activities, and one theme, two big themes. One is to connect with Bronzeville, which we started last time. The second is to connect with China. And we have with us Nan Ning Lin, who will be a teaching assistant with us next quarter in the course called Urban Innovation, and there's a subtitle with Place, and Scene. And you know a little bit about this from some of our readings already. Someone has a little in the background. Could you? Yeah, there we go. Someone had made it mute. She will introduce just a little bit, and she's catching a plane, so we're going to let her lead right off. Nanning, please introduce yourself and whatever you want to say about the course or your own. Why don't you introduce your own background, that you've spent 5 years working in jobs doing this kind of activity in China and the US. That's very important. So you do have not just an academic background, you have some actual working experience. And any quick thoughts on that, and then what you want to show or say?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I'm Ning Ning, a second year MPP student. I'll be the teaching assistant for urban innovation. The Professor Clark will be teaching in spring quarter. I'm originally from Ningbo, China. I used to work with a state-owned company focusing on urban investment and development. So that I work with local government, impact investors, urban planners, architects, artists, and residents on an urban revitalization project in my hometown. So, Professor, would you like me to share the video I showed you, or like I can continue before I show the teaser video?
Maybe just a few more words on the more general things, and then
sure.
The video.
Cool. Got it. So when I was working on this project, I constantly asked myself, what does the city form actually mean to the people who live there? What does city planner want do to make the city image more vivid, memorable, and distinguishable? So the moving elements in a city, and in particular the people and their activities, are as important as the built environment. We're not simply observers, we are part of that, right? And with other participants. So our perception of the city is not sustained, but rather partial, fragmentary, mixed with other concerns. Imagine that you are in a new city. You would like, how are you gonna feel that? What's gonna be your impression? It can be the color, shape, smell, sound, and touch. So every citizen has had long associations with some part of their cities, and their image are soaked in memories and meanings. Urbanization takes place in different form and pace across the world. But if you are interested in learning what factors drive crucial decisions about where to live, work, open a business, how innovative planning practices guide urban development and change things, I think this is a class you want to take, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. All right.
Actually, can you, maybe you don't have, do you have screen sharing working for you? Maybe not. Yes. Okay, great.
So this is the teaser video I made, just showing some stray scenes from mostly from China. Wait a second. I'm not sure whether I'm sharing the sound as well. Let me check.
Yes, it came through.
Okay, cool. That'll be great. a second. It should be.
Where are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? And now, why you stop here on this street? Is that because the flowers sent from the street corner or the stars up in the sky? You walk through 4 seasons. You bump into different people. You sing, you dance, you stay, and then you live a life. It's so strewn with tears, laughters, and memories. Where there is a stream, there will be people dancing.
那片空地就在不远，透过窗台只能想念。可是你不在身边，我如何度过这场日无聊爆炸的时间？希望你带我去公园，我们还能不能再见？语言对话就无言。有空地的地方，就会有人在跳舞；有音乐的地方，生活就不会荒芜；有烟火的城市，就会有喜剧在演出。有你陪伴的地方，才是我的归宿。
All right, that'll be the video.
Any quick questions?
I know the song is in Chinese, so probably, but it's basically saying that people are dancing on street or in park, live their own life.
Okay, now that's terrific. So the combination, the images, the sounds, the songs, the feelings that join people with these, you brought out very powerfully, which is terrific. So congratulations. Anything anyone wants to ask, to elaborate anything you saw there briefly? Or about the course? The course we're finishing now is a perfect introduction. We'll go into more detail in these in the specifics with placemaking generally, economic impacts, specifics of doing it, and how examples are proceeding, including China, US, France especially, but also others. Okay, well, I know you're catching an airplane or whatever, and I will wave goodbye and say, look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much. That was perfect.
Thank you for having me here. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right. Do we have, I think, Sharon, do you have the end for the end? Well, actually, I could show one thing, but if you have the one thing I sent last Wednesday, which is really a video about the Pilgrim Baptist Church. That was, I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure I sent it to you and we didn't get to that. I will look for another one as well, as I've got a couple of things, but I will move over to that and just have, that is, I want to have a little bit more on Bronzeville so we can show and look for and then see some specific comparison potentials between Chicago, Chinese cities, and we may not have such details on French cities, but at the high levels as well as the very specific neighborhood levels. And that's what Bronzeville is great for, that we have huge diversity right here inside Chicago neighborhoods. And as I said, I've lived in Bronzeville the whole time. I mean, most of my lifetime. I've served on many committees with Toni Preckwinkle, got me involved in several. She was a student. She's now president of the Cook County Board. When she was alderman of this area, she got me involved on a TIF and then on these other committees advising the alderman. And I wanted to do so because I wanted to have not just these abstract conceptions of faraway places, but tie in with some very local specifics here. So I'm looking for one more thing I will open up. Oops, let me come back here to this, open this, and we're going to use a couple of things at one after the other. And Sharon, if you find yours, you can go ahead and start showing it. Otherwise, I'll bring this up. Okay.
I don't think I can.
Yeah.
I don't think you have sent that video to us.
No, you don't see it. Okay, well,
Yeah.
let me push on then. I've got stuff here then.
Professor, there's someone who wants to give a presentation for today.
Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you for that reminder. Why don't we let them go ahead? That's fine. That's perfect. Now, Nunning, I wanted to let you go first as she's flying, but yes, please do. Do we have more than one or just the one?
I think for now it's like Subha Lakshmi Ray, she wants to present. So
okay, yes, I'm sorry. Please do.
People, yeah.
Perfect timing. Thanks for reminding us.
Hi, Professor. I'm going to try and share my screen. Yeah, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Go ahead, you can do now.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, can you guys see a presentation by any chance?
No.
Okay. Okay, can I email the presentation to someone? Because I think something's happening with my Zoom.
Try emailing to one of us and then we can show the presentation and you can go through with the presentation.
Sorry, I didn't anticipate that this would happen. I just need a minute. It won't let me send it because it's too heavy. Okay, I guess I can just talk about what it is because I'm not being able to show you the PPT, unfortunately, which takes away from what the project is quite a bit. But so basically, I'm still going to try and see if I can email it via Gmail or something. Just give me a minute. I'm so sorry.
Is there anyone else who wants to present today? Like, there was someone who's willing to present this Wednesday, but is there someone who wants to present today? No, I don't think so.
Okay, if you're still stuck, I can present a little bit on Bronzeville if you want here.
That can work. It's sending via Gmail. It'll just take maybe like a minute or two. So you can go ahead and I can present after you.
Okay, let me, something happened to the screen sharing. Anyway, I'm confused here. What happened to me? Go back to this. Okay. So back there. Yeah, am I authorized here? No, that's the wrong. We're wasting lots of time. Okay, here we go. So I'll try screen share here, and then okay, you see this? Some text.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right, this is a long title. Bronzeville Soul, the significance, culture, and history of a community as it pertains to the future. Bronzeville lakefront development on the former site of Michael Reese Hospital and Medical Center. So we've been meeting for 4 years. We're continuing on. The hospital was torn down in preparation for the Olympics, which Chicago had a bid in for and lost. They tore down the hospital. It was going to be the center for all of the sports teams, and it was mud for about 9 years. Then it was potentially bought by a developer who we saw a little bit of last time, but he has not purchased it. It still belongs to the city, and he's been in negotiation with us, with the alderman and with city staff. And then the alderman had created an advisory group that you saw bits of, and this is a subgroup of that advisory group working on the subcommittee on culture, community, history, advising Alderman Sophia King, Michael Reese Advisory. Okay, so Enrique Beckman, former MD, PhD, former CEO and board chairman, Michael Reese Hospital. Me, Sharon Gill, she's been a high school teacher. She's been a educator. She's been community organizer, lots of things. John Smith, pastor of the major church right next to the project. And there's a bit there. Diane Dinkins, President Carr, she's for most of her 40 years or so, she was director of the South Side Cultural Center, major African. It's the only one of some 180 local cultural centers created across the US in the New Deal in the 1930s. This is the only one remaining. And then Timmy Black, who's a historian and activist in civil rights activities. And so basically we have some background that's broader, but I'm going to focus here more on really the pictures, just to give you a little bit of the flavor. The idea is to create a welcoming center as part of this project, and that's what the alderman and many of the committee members really are most interested in, that would join this one remaining site of Gropius in Illinois, what's now called the Singer Pavilion, with Bronzeville, with the diversity that was partially harmonized with Thomas Dorsey, creators of the gospel and more, and recordings, chess records, major recordings of blues, jazz, gospel, R&B took off here, plus what was performed from the 1930s onward, etc. The Daily Defender newspaper. Okay, so if we have overview how these are connected, these are important for the entire city. Internationally, they bring visitors to Chicago. They scare some away, but they attract others. And so how to join these, our idea is not to have everything in one place, but to have this guide, which we've written up here, spending years putting these pieces together, having a little location at the Welcoming Center, and then have buses or mini buses that can take people around and show them some of these others, as well as having videos and artifacts introducing them. So here's some of the hospital stuff, the first horse-drawn ambulance system, all kinds of things were created. This is a major national innovative hospital. This is the last building which is still standing from the whole Michael Reese Hospital Center, which was preserved because it's the only one designed by Gropius in Illinois. This was okay. This is Michael Reese, whose name goes to the hospital. On the left, this is where softball, large size softball, was invented right here and played at the edge of Lake Michigan. So the Bronzeville, the Great Migration, Soul Man statue. And if you didn't know his name before, you've now learned that long name on Lakeshore Drive. Soul Man. These are soles all over his body, shoe soles. Here's all of his possessions as he is walking from the slave South prior to 1865 in what was called the Underground Railroad. Of a few people here and there who would help slaves get to the North. Then the Daily Defender, 1865. The trains brought all kinds of people. This was the Great Migration of African Americans to Chicago, Detroit, other cities in the North. And some of the kinds of things which were then created in this area, this geographic area, because Chicago politics was ethnic politics, and people did not want, that is, the Irish did not want the Blacks, the Poles did not want the Italians did not want the Germans, and so African Americans stayed pretty much in Bronzeville. Whoops, we're in the wrong, I just flipped to the, here we go. And so this kept together. William Julius Wilson has talked about how when we had these creative activities spread apart as tolerance increased from through the 20th century, many of these folks moved to all around Chicago and to even suburbs. But the sources of these are often right here still in Bronzeville. So how to connect these with past and present is what we're doing. And here are examples: the directory of information, vacant lots replaced, etc. This is the South Side Community Arts Center, which was directed by Diane Dinkins. And Eleanor Roosevelt delivered the first presentation here. National Trust, it's the only one of these, as I mentioned, that's still standing. All kinds of poetry, art, other sorts of things. This is the further south, of course, the Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable Museum right next to the university. The end of the midway, it's right there. one of the most famous African-American painters, probably the most famous, Archibald Motley. Fantastic painter, portraits of Bronzeville clubs and scenes in the 1920s and 30s. Give a flavor for the dynamism, the excitement, the alcohol, the flirtation, is there money passing, where and how, cigarettes. And of course, this was prior to 1933. This is where people would come from Lincoln Park and Winnetka to pick up a car trunk full of alcohol and take home, as well as stay around for some of the dancing and other things. Some of the people who presented here at the Arts Culture Center, the newspaper, Chicago Defender, and historic churches. This was the first mega church in the United States, basically. And the co-author, one of our co-authors is the current minister. Here it is on the corner of King Drive and 31st Street. Second oldest, and the other American Methodist Baptist churches really in Chicago all really sprang from here. Civil War, Camp Douglas. All right, Pilgrim Baptist Church. This is what I hope we could find that separate video on, but we may not have enough time if this is. If we do, we can play it. But basically, it shows how the current day drill or rap, all kinds of rap, hip hop, jazz emerged in conjunction and with the blues. And there were people who were doing blues and jazz who also created gospel. And this is the church which was built as a Jewish synagogue. The Jews moved they moved their congregation to near Hyde Park and then to the north side. But it was here, and this was a partially Jewish neighborhood at the end of the 19th century. Thomas A. Dorsey was the critical player, father of gospel music, music director of Pilgrim Baptist Church. Here it is. Let me see if this plays. Let's give it a little bit. Can you see all this? Okay, everybody?
Pilgrim Baptist Church, 33rd in Indiana.
can't see it.
This is where gospel music was born. It suffered a devastating fire in 2006. There's very little left besides the bridge.
Until the video.
The congregation isn't gone. It's got a modern building across the street. But the church that made so much history is. It became a Baptist church in the 20s. Thomas Dorsey was hired in the 30s to be the music director, and he is considered the father of modern gospel music. He was a blues pianist, so it all comes from the blues. It's no exaggeration when people say that. But the sounds he invented, most notably with an anthem called Precious Lord, Take My Hand, that's what became known as gospel. Precious Lord. Every other key artist in the early development of gospel either performed that song or worked with Dorsey. Lead me on. Many were members of this church. Mahalia Jackson sang the song at the funeral of Reverend Martin Luther King. Albertina Walker worked with Dorsey at this church. The Staple Singers went to this church. They're key because
Professor, we can't see the video.
everything that gospel was moved forward into other genres. I mean, other staples, R&B, soul, funk, gospel, yes, all of that. And gospel continues to be heard in all music today of significance, or at least a lot of it. I mean, you can hear it in Kanye West, Jesus Walked. Even the script was to the victims of welfare, feel we living in hell here, hell yeah. You can hear it in Chance the Rapper. It seems like blessings keep falling in my lap. Even R. Kelly, who's torn between heaven and hell. All modern soul, R&B, and much of hip hop has this gospel influence. I think gospel now, if you think of it strictly as religious music, it always transcended that because churches like Pilgrim Baptist were a center of community. The civil rights movement was born in places like this among the congregations who wanted to be respected as children of God. All of us are. It powered the civil rights movement. It remains a source of stability and community and hope throughout the troubled south and west sides of the city, even if the soundtrack is different. But it isn't that different. Once again, this is a key locale that doesn't have a plaque, but it all started here. Amen and hallelujah. Are you ready?
Okay, I want to close this one. Okay, so cancel. And I'm still, you were screen sharing. I'm trying not to stop the share, but close this thing. And all right, let me stop the I'll just stop here for a moment. Do we have Abhishek, you said something, or do we have something ready?
I think Subha Lakshmi should be ready with the presentation. What's the conclusion?
Yeah, you can that tells me you can see my slides. Okay, so yeah, am I audible?
Yep, this is fine. Please talk.
Right. So for this class, I'm writing a paper on the anti-CAA NRC protests that happened in India. They happened in 2019. They started, I think they reached their peak in December, and they kind of moved on into the early parts of 2020, and then the pandemic was what brought an end to them. So, I mean, I say 2019, but I will also be talking about events that happened in 2020. And what I'm going to do for the purpose of this paper is basically conduct a content analysis on the different forms of political participation that emerged in this protest. And I'm going to try and locate it onto the framework of a new social movement, as we've learned about in this class. So for the sake of locating it in the context of this paper, when we read Engelhardt, we read that in the postmodern era, we saw a shift in the center of authority from the state to the individual. And the economic prosperity that came about in like the time of modernity led to issues that people protested and people mobilized around being more about people's subjective well-being rather than collective political issues. So the new social movement paradigm was located, I feel, within this framework of it being a more voluntary, volatile form of protest, which was ad hoc in its organization. It was individualistic in its participation and its focus. And there were more participation from institutions of higher education and more use of communication technologies. So in this protest, you did see all of these things playing different roles, but then I found that the context does matter to a great extent, and the way in which these things unfold in context make a lot of difference. So yeah. So what is the CAA-NRC? The CAA stands for the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was passed by the government in the early part of December. And according to the act, the citizenship claims of any person belonging to a Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, or Christian community from our neighboring countries of Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, although technically Afghanistan is not a neighbor country, but sure, whatever, who entered India before the 31st of December 2014, they would basically be allowed citizenship and not be subjected to the Foreigners Act or the Passport Entry Act that other immigrants would be subjected to. Now, this seems like a valid claim to make, but why protest? It was because this act laid out a framework for the government to be directly discriminatory towards Muslims, and also to make religion an explicit basis of citizenship, which went directly against the secular ethos that was espoused in our constitution. And the plan was to implement the CAA alongside the NRC in different states, the National Registry of Citizenship, which was added to the original Citizenship Amendment Act in, I believe, 2003. I'm not sure. So yeah, in 2003. So the NRC basically mandates every citizen to prove their citizenship by showing valid documentation. And the decision the discretion to determine what kind of documentations are valid were left to government officials, and these government officials worked for a Hindu fundamentalist party. So there was a very obvious mechanism for this act to become a tool to exacerbate marginalization, and to weaken, if not remove completely, like low-income Muslim communities' claims to citizenship. And as and when the act was introduced, it met with more and more opposition, and then the government's response to the opposition just made things worse, which I will get into eventually. But yeah, so a brief history of the BJP. The religion became in India a basis of political mobilization during the colonial era, where the colonial government, the British government, used religious identity as a sort of tactic to divide Indian society and to not let them find their unity. And yes, that didn't work because they did ultimately find their unity, but there were internal fractures that were starting to show even in political participation and civil society during the time of nationalistic mobilization. Now, post-independence, the Jawaharlal Nehru's government tried to maintain a certain level of secular ideals, and they tried to move ahead from the genocide that happened during the partition of 1947, which basically, the day that India's independence was declared was also the day that India and Pakistan was split into two countries, and there was a lot of cross-border violence and migration that happened overnight. So a lot of people didn't really have time to even leave their houses properly, let alone gather documentation that determines them to be citizens of either country. So it was basically a mess, and the violence has very recently been acknowledged as a genocide, and new statistics come out very regularly, like talking about the extent of the violence that actually happened. So obviously, a large part of the project of nation building was moving ahead from the partition and trying to adopt a secular ethos in place of like the brewing communal attitudes that were actually present in civil society. But the Congress party lost a lot of the national patriotic sympathy that they had and the nostalgia that was associated with their mobilization during the nationalist movement, with a constitutional emergency that was declared from 1975 to 77. And when this emergency was met with opposition, that is when the right-wing growing Hindu fundamentalist body kind of first found an entry into political representation. Now, from that era, their popularity started to grow, and through the 1990s, it kind of reached its peak, such that towards the end of the 1990s, from 99 to 2004, they did serve one term as the ruling party and formed their own government. Now, their return to power in 2014 was already very controversial, because in their first term also there were quite a few controversies that they got into, but then they were re-elected in 2019. And upon their re-election in 2019, the CAA was one of their first ventures, and it was met with widespread opposition, and mostly by students. Now, student participation is the second sort of leg of this argument, where yes, there has been an increasing level of student participation in the past few decades in India in social movements. But there has also been this trend within this newly neoliberal commercialized media to create a narrative that very much supports the ideology of the state, which sees any attempts to question decisions of the government and to criticize government actions and policies as an attack on the nation. So as higher education became more and more available and student bodies became more representative of broader interests in Indian society, which is very diverse and continues to be characterized by a lot of inequality.
Welcome back.
There was this growing trend of the media lambasting any attempts by students to sort of protest against government decisions and to claim them to be against the nation. And they were called all kinds of things. I mean, anti-national is one of the milder words used for it, but they were called red insects, where red is very commonly used to represent leftist ideologies. So the suicide of Rohit Vemula in 2016, the arrest of Kanhaiya Kumar in JNU made, especially so Jawaharlal Nehru University, also known as JNU, later became one of the sites of contestation where till date the government continues to try and malign it, if not completely shut it down, because it believes that that is where anti-nationalists are bred and it's a threat to the nation, so it needs to be either completely transformed or shut down. Now, in 2019, initially when the act was introduced, sorry, my video hasn't been on the entire time, sorry, but when the act was introduced, there was a lot of opposition to it right at the outset, because people knew that the way it read, it seemed discriminatory inherently. But then eventually, as students kept trying to mobilize and trying to raise awareness and trying to get the act repealed, the government kept cashing into this anti-national narrative to the point where on 5th December 2019, I have the dates written here somewhere, sorry. Yeah, on 5th December 2019, Jamia Millia Islamia is, I'm going to call it Jamia for the rest of the presentation because it's a big name, but Jamia is a central university, which means it's sponsored and funded by the central government. It's in Delhi, and it is known to have a very strong Muslim representation in its student body. The campus of Jamia Millia was entered by armed and masked police officers, and students were attacked, and the library was vandalized, and the campus was destroyed. And at the time, even while it was happening, the police constantly actively denied its presence. And when students who are like living their lives and studying in the library like most normal students do were literally attacked with batons and asked to leave the library, and there are pictures of students with their hands up who were asked to like march out on the streets away from the campus. They said we're targeting terrorists because that's what you do at this university, because not only is it a central university, a breeding ground for anti-nationals, it's also majority Muslim. Now, that was one event that sparked mass outrage, and protests sort of really erupted after that. And as the protests erupted, so did the state's response to them. So there was police brutality at protests. Armed fundamentalist civilians with extremist ideologies would enter protest sites with guns and randomly shoot at students who were protesting, chanting the name of, you know, particular Hindu gods as if it was a justification for violence. But that was one big event. And then on the 4th of January, a very similar thing happened in JNU, the aforementioned university where, there were protests earlier in 2016. So when the JNU protest happened, when the JNU attack happened, it wasn't the police, it was a mob of masked, armed people who entered the campus and vandalized the campus and beat up students and professors and literally anyone they could find. And then later slipped out despite having security present on campus. It clearly didn't work.
One more minute, please.
Sorry.
One more minute.
Okay. So basically, when all of these events started happening with the JNU protests and the Jamia protests, and then later there were also riots in Delhi, social media became a very prominent element of the protest and participation in the protests. So now I have some pictures of like different posters and memes and information that circulated on social media in order to get people to participate in a protest that a lot of them were not directly affected by, because a lot of us, like myself, are economically well-off Hindu people who would not be affected by the act. But there were posters that carried poetry and messages of peace and messages that said things like, "This is not my country," or "not in my constitution." Sanghi here, for example, means right-wing. Then, yeah, I'm just gonna skip through a lot of these because, yeah, the ones that I really want to show you. There were also a lot of Game of Thrones references. There were quite a few comparisons of our prime minister with Hitler. And then there were basically people of all backgrounds who came into the streets as a result of people spreading true narratives. So for example, these are pictures that were circulated on Twitter when the media was claiming that no one was attacked in any of these universities and there was no violence. There are people who took pictures and sent them out as they were happening to make sure people knew what was happening in the country. And celebrities would visit protests, WhatsApp group chats would be exposed, videos would be sent out so that people knew that counter to the narrative by the dominant national media, there is a narrative here that sort of tells you what the actual truth is. Now, all of this leads me to question, to what extent can we actually map these movements onto the framework of new social movements? Because they, on the one hand, they are individualistic, but then are they? So for example, as a participant in several of those protests and as someone who lived on one of the campuses that was attacked, I saw how it ceased to be about individual participation versus community participation. It was more about finding ways to not get beat up and still be there, and knowing that one body's presence matters in that space of several bodies trying to band against an oppressive state and a violent police force. And what is the role of social media in these movements? Because a lot of people will not want their bodies to be there. A lot of people won't want to get beaten up, or will be celebrities who can't afford to enter public spaces without security and without creating a whole set of attention to them, like drawing attention to themselves and stuff like that. And then finally, how do people explain the fact that something like the CAA, which is not directly relevant to a lot of the people who did end up protesting, was still something that inspired so many people to talk about it, whether by attending protests or by participating on social media or both? So the conclusions that I am leaning towards is that A, despite the advantages of modernity, internal hierarchies, especially in third world countries like India, have persisted, and they have led to the use of various modern technologies and ideologies to create new divides and new hurdles to the egalitarianism that we all strive to achieve. And social media and popular culture have come and worked together to create a sort of wider field of participation, whether it is in terms of participating on social media because you can't attend the protests, or using social media as a tool to bring more people to the streets. I think it's become its own discourse in terms of expressing dissent at a time when the media will brand any voice of dissent as an irrational voice. And finally, democracy is still, even though it is a disputed, it's a disputed concept, it's very much a sort of Western concept. Democracy and secularism are still being fought for as issues that pertain not just to our personal lifestyles, but as ideological things that we would want to maintain in a certain way in our future. So even if they're not directly affecting us in terms of our own lifestyles, we're still fighting for them because we know that one day the government that is turning on any citizen is going to turn on us. So yeah, that's my presentation.
Excellent. Any quick questions directly for her?
Also, if people want like more information, I have a lot of like screenshots of Twitter posts and Instagram things that were circulated with information, because there still have been no arrests for perpetrators and things. So yeah, there are campaigns that are still going on if people still want to know about it.
I just have a follow-up question. So after CEA, we have seen a massive protest, like a farmer protest. So what does this tell about the government? There's a lot more dissent about the government, but the government's still enjoying the majority, not even in the center, but some states like, so if you see the polling result, I think the government gonna form again in like a couple of states. So what does this tell about like political participation or the people's behavior towards the government?
I believe that a large reason why, despite being so widely criticized, and so for example, when I said that there were several other incidents of violence as part of these protests in Uttar Pradesh, which is one of the states in which the same party, the BJP, has regained power recently, there were riots to the point of several people dying, and yet the same government is back in power despite actively acknowledging that they were behind the violence. But I believe that if they're still back in power, it's not because people have moved on and forgotten as much as because there seems to be no viable alternative to getting their needs met. Because we still, I mean, I say we, but a large part of the low income disadvantaged sections of the population still very much rely on government mechanisms to get their needs met. So I think it's more about having a channel to get your needs met versus having no channel because you are ideologically opposed to the BJP. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Let's push on with a little bit on, well, any quick questions on Bronzeville, that as a neighborhood, Chicago, and pointing out, of course, the linkage to India was Martin Luther King brought back the idea from Gandhi and the Indians of non-violent protest and invoking religious themes, singing, marches in ways that were different from the classic terrorist, kill as many of the opposition as you can. Going back to Genghis Khan, in which we can see aspects of in the television around us, unfortunately, day by day right now in the Ukraine. The linkages to the arts, I'll just mention again explicitly, which you saw or you've seen in bits of through the course, talked about most with Kentuckville Karaoke, but that clearly is another linkage which joins emotion, moralism, and politics with protest activities in varying degrees, accepting the degree of legality which still may be present, or in other cases, pushing the edges or drawing in people who will fight against you, throw beer cans or shoot, branding irons as were used in the South in the US. But it's not so far when you see this covered with ISIS, with the Ukraine right now. Okay, let's push on then with Chinese, a little bit of scenes in China, which you saw a fragment of there. And this is now from the December 2021, a couple of months ago, 2-3 months ago, Scenes China Forum. And this is one of the 3 Chinese leaders, He Ji, introducing.
The Scenes Academy has also learned a lot. carried out exploration of China. So now I'd like to invite the Secretary General Wang Tong of the Science Academy to release the report to us. Welcome. Thank you very much, Professor Qi. Well, dear guests, online audience, I'm really honored to represent the Science Academy to share with you in past year with the help of the Science Academy what we have done. I'd like to thank Lei Xiaoli, Wang Xiuqi, and Zheng Hao to write the report together. I also like to thank for sponsors together with Professor Clark for your guidance. In July 2020, the Science Academy was formally established. We have been working hard to deeply integrate the science theory with Chinese academia in Chinese context. We held 36 online meetings totaling 6,500 minutes. We organized 6 academic forums of science, exchanged views with expert and scholars from Tsinghua University, Tongji University, Shenzhen University, China Urban Planning and Design Institute, Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, and science practitioners from Chengdu Qingyuan Community, Banke Group, and the Shanghai Lujiazui Community. The topics we discussed and studied include the practice of setting up a city, the case of community governance, the thought of cultural development, the exploration of social innovation, and discussion of research methods. We are committed to introducing the science theory from an international perspective to combine it with the Chinese new development stage. With the support of the Science Academy, Professor Clark, the founder of the science theory, delivered keynote speeches at 3 major domestic academic events, conducted exchanges and dialogues with colleagues from all walks of life. The River Science, discussing culture exchanges with 160 domestic experts and scholars. China's culture industry and culture phenomenon attracted more than 1 million online viewers. Science as soft power, jointly reported by 4 mainstream media, attracting more than 10 million people and read by more than 60 million readers. Together with the WeChat official accounts Science Research Alliance, we published more than 60 articles focusing on more than 3,000 users and reading more than 22,000 times. We also actively exploring the joint efforts of Xinlang Weibo, WeChat, Bilibili, and other multimedia platforms to promote the depth and breadth of science research. The members of the Science Academy have presided over and participated in more than 10 national level projects, published 25 papers in academic journals, and published 3 series of science studies. The research topics range from urban innovation to rural revitalization, from virtual space to physical space, from bohemian science, urban consumption science, to community life science, from red tourism, artistic production, culture inheritance, to new economic research, constantly expanding the theoretical boundaries.
Okay, let me flash forward to one example of this work with 29. Again, Qiji.
And Qiran, we're going to deliver our presentation. And while we are doing the presentation, we wait for Professor Wu to come back. Well, for the recent years, we know the science are popular in the world, and science have transformed from the theory to the practice. When we practice things, we confront some problems. So what kind of things can continue to develop? So what gave the glamour to things? That is why today our topic is vast productivity of things. As a matter of fact, last year during the forum, we briefed you about productivity. Well, in the professor's book, and he has a book about can talk about karaoke. Well, through many years, through many countries' experience, and we know the value of buzz. So let's do a review. because of a specific scenario, because of people's behaviors and people's understanding on the practice and participation. So this is a kind of a group of energy because of the bus. So bus is a vessel of the things and a magnet field of the things. So as you can see, the bus and the things, they coexist. Often we say in the bus, we are able to see the things, and in things, because of the bus generated from the things, and the bus helps to shape the things. So as you can see, this is a main line, and through this main line, we can combine the bus and the thing. So it will provide a kind of space. So during the practice, we often meet some problem, like Professor Chen Bo mentioned. So how can we make those intangible, invisible thing to turn it into something tangible, something can be seen, something can be measured? That is why when we look at the bus, actually the bus is hard to copy, it's hard to train. So is bus intangible, or can bus be felt? And is that possible for us to find a paradigm to copy bus? So let's think about, well, in a community with a lot of creativity or in a public space. So how can we attract people with a creativity? So how can we influence the local people to recognize the culture? As a matter of fact, so the things is stepping into a new development phase. If you look at the traditional space, actually we shift from the traditional space to the consumption values and a multicultural mingle. So for those kind of elements, it seems that we cannot measure, but it asks us to think about aesthetics of the things and to reflect the space needs and culture expectation for the culture. In the past year, we had done great research. We focused on normal community and grassroots space. And you think about the driving power and the traffic attraction for the things, and we have a scientific evaluation. Of course, it requires a large workload, and we need to spend a lot of time and effort. That is why for the things we have scoring system like external and internal. That is what we call a bus productivity power. So that is why we hope when we measure the bus productivity, we're able to provide a guideline for building of communities. Next, I'm going to invite Dr. Qi Ran, and he's going to talk about our practical work and our conclusions. Thank you, Professor Qi. In the past year, we visited Beijing, Shanghai, Chengdu, and we visited 20 communities.
And we depend on the natural resources and the Ministry of Commerce, the planning research. And for the culture amenities, we categorize, include the social service, public culture service, education, leisure, community business, cultural resource, cultural innovation, organization, altogether 3,000 types of amenities with 8 categories. We also asked the experts to calculate and come up with the methods for the amenities categorization and analyzed the different roles of them. And according to our calculation, we find that including the life service, cultural education, and cultural services are generally considered as mainly acting inside the scene, which helps to promote the endogenous power of the community life circle, while the quality improved amenities include community business and cultural leisure. They are generally considered as acting outside the scenes and generating external attraction. At present, the construction of community life circle also represents a distinct life service and community business leading mode in the layout of cultural amenities. But through our further calculation of bus, we found that the overall busing degree of the community life circle would dominate dominated by life service amenities or community commercial amenities is not high because it relies too much on the layout of a single amenities type. Only when the internal bus of a community life circle is at a similar level to that of external bus, then it will have high bus performance, which is shown in this picture as these amenities marked with red boxes. It could see that the internal and external bus is similar, but general bus is high. It is generally believed that the development of endogenous power is far more important for communities than the interaction from the outside. But in fact, the comprehensive configuration of multiple amenities is the best for the development of the community life cycle. Therefore, what kind of cultural amenities configuration can promote local bus to the highest degree is the next integration that we want to focus on. So we use the qualitative comparison method to analyze the configuration of community cultural amenities so as to explore the configuration mode of cultural amenities that can promote local bus. For example, they have the neighborliness and legitimacy, drama, and also.
Okay, you get a good flavor of those. Let me see if I can bring in Dan Silver just to so you see his face for a second as the 1 second here. So here's the end of my stuff, and then we go into Dan. Oh, here we go, Dan Silver. Let's go. How can scenes spark innovations that illuminate and inspire? Whoops. 3 foundations. First, make new combinations that spark transformation. The table of elements from chemistry is a distinctly appropriate model for the individual elements, and it
Apple stores moved around to smaller cities. Over here, we have the spread of Walmart store.
a river, trees, flowers, bushes, and animals. Our artistic innovations in clothes, hairstyle, boats of this sort.
So there are things everywhere in our daily life, and we're going to invite our next speaker, Professor Daniel Silva. He comes from Department of Sociology, University of Toronto. Let's welcome Professor Daniel.
Hello, everybody. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Good evening. It is always a delight to be with friends and colleagues pursuing a common intellectual purpose, and now is no exception. Thank you to our hosts and our organizers for bringing us together for this summit to discuss how to move the study of scenes and the cultural life of cities more broadly forward. Today, I am not going to review the intellectual background or main concepts of the theory of scenes. I assume that for this group, these are familiar. Instead, I am going to lay out some of what I see as promising and important directions, which I believe can also help you to move forward in including and comparing many Chinese cities with one another and even with other cities and communities around the world. I will highlight two related themes. One, the evolution or change of scenes, and two, comparison of scenes across many cities. In many ways, these are versions of the same problem, since both concern how we extend beyond the single case, and Marta Kokak one in particular. The first problem is, the first side of this question is about the question of time, and the second part is space. And our goal should be to address both at once. Like physicists, we should think in terms of space-time, not space or time. Now, in scenescapes, much of our published work, we have primarily relied on a single time point. But the trends are often dramatic. The changes are often dramatic. Terry has spoken in his previous lectures about one excellent example in terms of the growth of cafes in Seoul compared to other cities around the world. Here we see graphs showing New York, in Chicago, and Los Angeles compared to the national US average. The blue line is the national average in the United States. The green line is Los Angeles. The red line is Chicago. And the purple line is New York City. And you can see we have very dramatic differences in many cases. Large increases here in beauty salons, especially in New York City, but the national average is going up. Fine arts schools going up everywhere, so that the growth of the arts continues. Full service restaurants are increasing, but especially so in New York City. Independent artists dramatically growing in Los Angeles, Chicago down here lower. Human rights organizations increasing dramatically in New York City, and so on and so forth. We can also map, in this case, chart trends in some of our scenes dimensions. Over the past 20 years, we see a growth in the dimension of exhibitionism. These are compared to average throughout. We see increases here in self-expression, growth, especially here in Chicago, in glamorousness, some decline in New York and Los Angeles in neighborliness. Now, these graphs are all interesting, but why are they interesting? They become interesting because they enable comparison. Without the ability to compare the trends across cities and to the national average, we would have no idea what we were even seeing. The meaning of up and down and high and low, consistent or erratic. These are all comparative, and you cannot even see, and I mean literally see, what is right in front of you unless you have the means to compare it to elsewhere, before and after. This is a classic in social theory, from Adam Smith and Charles Cooley to Emile Durkheim. You cannot perceive yourself without doing so through the eyes of others. This is why Terry and I insist repeatedly on the importance of collecting data with a view to broad-based comparisons. The goal is not to be big for the sake of being big. The reason we like to collect big data is not just so it is big. It is because comparison is the beginning of wisdom and self-understanding. Simply charting these comparative trends is a first step.
Okay. We've got just a few minutes remaining. Open discussion for anything, which we can continue, of course, on Wednesday. But any comments, interpretations, challenges, whatever that you would like to raise, having seen now a bit of the variety from India, Bronzeville, and different locations in the US and China. Charlotte, are you there today? You usually have some interesting things to say.
Hi. I'm looking back at my notes. You mentioned that, I think I may have misheard actually, gospel music developed alongside jazz and blues. I just thought that was really interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about maybe the development of music in terms of city development or neighborhood development?
What the video made most forcefully was the degree to which this happened in one church, and how it was initially a Jewish synagogue, and then one feature which I didn't mention orally was the very interesting degree of interpenetration between Jewish institutions or Jewish entrepreneurs and the African Americans in the Bronzeville area, in ways that the Jewish sort of feeling of being an outsider, not getting along with the dominant Chicago political culture, which was really Catholic, Roman Catholic and Irish political leaders, led them to being outsiders and thus finding ways to work together. I had a woman who worked, she got a BA at the USC. She put on bar mitzvahs for 30, 40 years, and she came back and did an MA on Jewish and African American and Irish political leaders in Chicago. and had very interesting comparisons and so forth. So that's, I mean, that has all qualitative, all interviews of individual political leaders. But to come back to the specifics of music, has been a critical part, especially for the African Americans. And gospel in that one location has in turn, and I'll look across the street. Another one is on King Drive is one high school here, which has graduated many students who have been leaders in writing and performing and recording songs. And it means that some of the most famous were there in the video, which you saw, but including Elvis Presley. That is, Elvis Presley grew up and was surrounded by gospel music. And so what he first worked on before he developed his own kinds of songs were gospel songs. So in that sense, the cultural impact of these interrelated African-American streams of music have been absolutely central across not just the US, but the world. I've had students who've done BAs and MAs on hip hop in China, blues in Sweden, and so forth. That is, these are now international and have been taken over and adapted, as you saw in many different ways. So I would say, if you want, there are many cases. I won't try to summarize myself here. Just do a little search on NPR and listen to some of the names you saw there. Talk about how they themselves in their own music took competing elements, especially the transgressive, anti-establishment, patriarchal, sort of male-oriented tradition in a lot of the more contemporary hip hop and rap, and how some of the leaders of rap then went back and recorded and called it a new movement of Christian rap. And so many of the themes are reversed, and they're more egalitarian. They're against sort of male domination, etc. But they include Christian elements to join these pieces together with the music. So I'm making the point which you heard from Kiji. What drives this? And so you hear the same question in Dan Silver more abstractly, in Kiji within neighborhoods inside the major Chinese cities. What are the specific components as which we can capture with the growth in the number of beauty supplies, the number of perfumes, the number of record shops, the number of bookstores, and the number hugely of cafes, which there's something like 25,000 cafes in Seoul, which is something like 4 times the number in New York or Paris. There were no cafes in Seoul 15 years ago. So where and how these things are working and building a new economy, social life, musical, aesthetically defined lifestyle, which drives these multiple components together, so that to understand the division of labor and the increase of wealth, which Adam Smith wrote about, we touched on in the first week of the course, you need to include cafes, aesthetics, music, and the kinds of recordings which have been featured in Bronzeville for the last 75 years. Okay, that's a quick overview, but more, that is, I'd say, for those of you interested, take a look at, I mean, I found particularly compelling some of the, probably I've heard 10 or more NPR recordings, not only American, you can have Iranian film women and men, some of them then migrating to England because of Muslim relationships, sensitivity, et cetera, but these are powerful. And of course we saw this in the presentation on India. These are very new in ways that don't fit race, class, gender, and national origin in simple manner. Those same components can be there as in India with Hindu versus Muslim, but they become more powerful when they're joined with music, with poetry, with film, and rhyming, which holds them together. Okay, these are themes which I'm also explicitly mentioning because they will be detailed. But I've not detailed the arts part in this course, but we will next quarter. So we'll show how these pieces join and feature more explicitly the aesthetic components. The aesthetics is a simple way of summarizing things like transgression or neighborliness. And these in turn have been written about by novelists, by Hollywood critics, by music commentators in ways that have a richness and a subtlety which we want to bring to and connect with social science the way smart political leaders, mayors, presidential candidates have been doing from Andrew Jackson onward, but also more recently Bill Clinton, Barack Obama have done this very explicitly. Okay, we're at the end of our time. We'll stay on for office hours if you have a specific question you'd like to raise.
Luke has a question.
Yeah, why don't we leave the recording on? We do have a hand up from, is this Luke? What's on your mind?
Just one comment and one question.
Go ahead.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
I just think it's interesting that in the tale of gentrification, you have artists who come in and make an area cool, increase its economic value, and then get kicked out. I just think it's an example of how economics are so often misaligned with what the true drivers of change are, and it doesn't get accounted for sort of by just conventional accounting or things of that nature. And then I guess just my question is sort of in a different direction, but would you say that luxury sort of stores and retail, does that sort of increase the well-being necessarily of a community or of a neighborhood?
That's shall I say, a rather loaded question. I would say you'll get a real answer if take a look at least at the syllabus for next quarter, and you can see how that can be explored. What I've tried to do, rather than saying there's one thing which is or is not happening, but that is you heard answers to your question in what Dan Silver said, in what Kiji said, in what these are central themes. That is, what are the components and how do they fit together? Which one comes first? And then we have long sections in the Scenescapes book on how do these relate to income equality, income inequality, including poverty, and which components of scenes are particularly linked with more equality, but as well as diversity, that is some very high and some very low income components. And that this is what Joseph Yee and I talked about, his book on God and Karate in the South Side. Things which join the rich and the poor are martial arts clubs, martial arts studios, popular culture, from Beyonce to gospel, and evangelical churches. These are some of the specific institutions that are the least like Louis Vuitton. Louis Vuitton is like, or that is, if we look at broader things beyond names, if you look at things, one of some of the activities include yoga. Yoga alone is a very high income activity. It's very segregated by income, like Louis Vuitton. On the other hand, yoga has been taken over in the South Side of Chicago by Theaster Gates, and in the old South Shore Bank, they now do yoga. They have maybe 10 to 15 folks, almost all African-American, low income. And for the first 10 minutes, each person before they do yoga together talks about What's most on their mind? What's troubling them? It's a combination of yoga with popular psychoanalysis, which is what you can get in other do-it-yourself kinds of activities, but they're facilitated by the neighborliness and the low-income African-American culture neighborliness featured by Theaster Gates. So that means, so in that sense, he's showing with this example how you can take something which is not supposed to be just low-income African-American at all, and you can transform it. Okay. And some of my neighbors, I mean, I've seen parked cars filled with stuff behind their, in the back of an SUV with names like Louis Vuitton on it. So there's another way to get Louis Vuitton, which a year ago in the summer, people did enforce, and it's been happening in other places around the world. All right. We have a hand up from Susanna.
Yeah, I was just wondering when we'll get our grades back for the midterm.
Okay, we have 2 TAs here. What's the latest, folks?
It should be in like 3 hours, like I think that's
Tonight, I think. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, tomorrow or tonight.
I think by tonight, like hopefully, like.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Anything else? Thank you, folks. Thank you, Shubha. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you for connecting us with these themes in India. Anything, Grace Kim, do you have anything you want to add or ask?
Yeah, I was wondering, I was actually wondering if I could talk to you a little after class about the final paper a bit more.
Yeah, sure. Let's see how much we have with others. Charlotte or Susanna, do you have anything else you want to raise? No. Okay. It's fine to maybe sign off. And Luke, I avoided a one-word answer, as you can see.